Hello, everybody. Chris DiCenso here. Welcome to the 7 Keys to Profitable Growth webinar put on by Growth Strategy Partners, along with my partner, Paul Plotzik. Paul, you there?
Hello, I'm here. Welcome, everyone.
So, in today's hour, well, first of all, some administrative stuff. It is being recorded, so if you want to hear it over and over again or share it with somebody, we'll send you a link to that when we're done. We will also send you the PowerPoint presentation when we're done sometime today. But also on your window to the right, there should be a section that says questions. If you have any questions for us throughout the presentation, please ask them. We'll try to answer them throughout the presentation, if not at the end.
Also, any comments, not only questions, but anything you'd like to comment about, just type it right in there.
Good point. Good point. When we talk about growth, first of all, just want to clarify, because some people interpret it differently. The growth we're talking about, profitable growth, is we're talking about the growth of your revenues, growth of your profits, but also of your organization, of your people. That'll be a big piece of today. So sometimes people think growth is just revenue growth. We're driving both profitability and the people side. And what we're going to share with you today is how to make really your business more successful. We'd like to do 2 things. We'd like to motivate you to take action to change what you're doing or improve upon what you're doing. But also kind of the realization, if you don't know what to do or know how to do it or need help, to quote unquote raise the flag and ask for help. We will tell you as we get into these 7 keys that companies that are applying these 7 keys, they're growing 15% faster than most companies, and they're 40% more profitable. There's an incentive to try to apply some of these keys that we're going to share with you today.
And motivation, folks, one of the things to think about motivation, it's like going to the gym. A lot of it is just showing up. So congratulations, you showed up to this webinar, and the next part may be showing up with questions, comments. We'll give you also an instrument that you can use, a couple of instruments that you can use in your business. So that's part of the showing up part that I'm mentioning. Chris?
Great. So quick introductions. We'll start with talking about some facts on growth to kind of shape the conversation, and then talk about where these 7 keys came from, how to begin implementing them, where specifically do you need to begin, why do some leaders struggle or teams struggle with implementing some of these 7, and then what do you do next? So that's the general agenda we're going to follow today. Introduction, I am the good-looking guy on the left, in the top left, Chris DiCenso. So I spent some years at some of these other consulting firms, built some practices for them, and probably late 90s, early 2000s, started looking at growth. How do you drive long-term successful growth? And that got me on this research study on what drives growth. Are there some fundamentals, some basic practices? So I originated these 7 keys to growth. And what I really like doing as an engineer, I like solving problems. And the problems I like solving are business problems. How do we help owners and leadership teams build a more successful business, and then eventually realize that success and sell that company? So that's why I do this. This is what I love about it. And when I'm not working, you can see that I boat. I'm a competitive shooter. I try to exercise. I do show up, Paul, and I exercise. So I guess that works. So, Paul, how about you?
Thank you. And I've been growing. I'm 6'5", so
That's true.
I've done a lot of growing. And as you can see from my my bio here, I have a background in psychology, and one of the reasons I got into business is I was working with families as part of a psychological practice that I had. And at one point, someone asked me some questions about their business. So I did spend some time with this business family, and that started me off where I started working with companies back in the 80s during one of the downturns, and had a turnaround business where we actually worked with companies that weren't doing well, and either found an equity partner or closed the business, a whole variety of different things, and had some successes in helping the business move forward. And as a result of that, I've managed to get myself into some small to mid-market companies, as well as a couple of Fortune 500 companies. I've actually worked for Harley-Davidson. I own one of their products. I've done work for Crate and Barrel, and I'm also proud to say that I've done some work for NASA Johnson Space Center in Texas. So I have a very broad and eclectic background in terms of the kind of experience that I've had in companies, and I do enjoy riding my Harley Davidson, and in fact worked with one of the companies that made all the seats and saddlebags for Harley Davidson some years ago, and then also spent some time at Harley Davidson running a training program. So that's a bit about me, and that's enough.
Nice. So you are a rocket scientist then? Is that
yeah, right. Sure.
So we all work under this umbrella called Growth Strategy Partners. There's 3 other partners in the firm. And in what we do, our focus is on accelerating the revenue, profit, and organizational growth we talked about earlier of privately held companies by applying these 7 keys. And we'll share with you the 7 keys later. But I think what's we're proud about is the fact that the results that we've delivered. On average, we've delivered over 220% profit improvement for our clients, and a 7 times return on professional fees. So you give us X, we're going to give you 7 times that in profit improvement, and besides not having to work harder. So let's talk about the foundation of Growth Strategy Partners. You see the research piece there. I built a consulting practice for Grant Thornton. Reengineering was the thing. And clients were saying, that's great, Chris, we're lean, mean, finding machines, how do you grow? And I said, that's a good question, I don't know. I know how to make you very efficient, but I don't know about the growth piece. And as the engineer then, I said, well, let's go do some research. I actually had the opportunity to work for Inc. magazine and build a consulting practice for them. And along the way, did some other independent research. So what I'm trying to do is figure out, is there some best practices, business fundamentals, I call them keys, to make successful growing companies, long-term successful growth. So in addition to some fast growth data sets, Think 500, there were some other faster growth databases that we formally surveyed, and also did some research, some independent studies. So you see Good to Great, Jim Collins, a big fan of his, a lot of other books there. Bain and Company, you see on the far right, Bain does a survey with their client base or Fortune 500, what tools and techniques are they using to be successful? And we've been pulling that data for a lot of years. So as you pull this all together and quantify it, so picture a big database, it points to 7 business fundamentals that drive profitable growth, successful growth, okay? And that's what we're going to share with you today. But before we do, I want to show you a little about what we learned in the process. One of them is that growth is relative, okay? So this is what's very, very important. In fact, it actually goes, if you think about it, if you're running a company that's been growing 7-8% a year and you think that's good, it could be good. If your industry, your competition is growing 10, 12, 13%, then you're actually underperforming to them. If you're growing 1% and the competitors are losing 3 or 4%, then you're actually ahead of them. So growth, you may say, I would say it's relative. It's relative to your direct competition, your market geography, whatever you would compare to. So the first thing we talk about is growth is relative. You might think you're doing well, but it's real relative to how your industry, your segment, and your competition's doing. The other learning, which was very interesting, this actually came from a Bain study, is that in a combination of all the experience we've had, internal controllable factors really determine your growth success, not external factors. So external would be the competition. It would be the market, the economy. That has less impact on your success than what you do inside the business, especially when it comes to privately held businesses. In fact, Bain did a study. So Bain is a large consulting firm, does a lot of strategy and growth, and they surveyed their Fortune 500, client base or prospect base, asking them, I think the question was, if you did not achieve your growth goals, why didn't you achieve them? And 75% of these executives, these are people that, supposedly know what they're doing, said it was all about internal controllable factors that we didn't do a good job at. Specifically, we didn't have a good plan. we didn't execute the plan, we couldn't make decisions. And that just supports the fact that, what we see is it's less about what's going outside, it's more about what's happening within your business that's driving your growth or not driving your growth.
And you'll find, folks, that theme runs throughout this whole webinar and throughout all of our work, that the focus is on you. And we'll talk a bit about Jim Collins' work and how he really emphasized that and found out how important that was for people in ownership and leadership positions.
Exactly. And then it comes down to, when I say more keys is equal to improved growth, there are fundamentals to growing a business. And when I completed the research study and found these 7, I was like, well, this is boring. This is motherhood apple pie. This is basic blocking and tackling. And I was like, we can't build a consulting practice on this because this is so easy. Everyone's going to be doing it. But what coincided with that was I had some speaking with Inc. magazine to 300 or 400 business owners, a whole series of it. And as I'd go out and quote unquote share these 7 keys, I clued on like the second or third speech. Hey, maybe we should ask these people how many of them are applying these 7. As I start asking how many are applying number 1, number 2, number 3, et cetera, and then I asked at the end, well, how many are applying, all 7? And it was less than 10%. And then I learned even a little better a few presentations later, start asking those people, oh, so you raised your hand. You said you're doing all 7 or fairly well. Who are you? Many of them were Inc. 500 winners. They were growing tremendously. So learning here is growth's relative. It is internal factors that drive this. And the more you apply these 7 keys, the more successful you're going to be. So what are the 7? We'll go through them.
Don't we have a survey we want to do here?
We do, Paul. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Somebody's got to keep me in line. So it's a poll. And the question we want to ask you, and we'd ask you to respond by clicking, what are your current challenges to improving your growth performance? So what are you challenged with currently? Is it trying to get new customers? Is it reducing your costs? Is it getting competition? The competition's what's impacting you. So if everyone just click on one of those, actually you can click on more than one, actually, on this case. Finding qualified people, or building and implementing a solid growth plan. So if you would click on one of these or 2 of these in terms of what your challenges are going to be, and we'll see where everyone is coming from. It may change a little bit what we do, but I'm sure what we're going to talk about, Paul, is going to be pertinent.
Relevant. Right.
Yeah, relevant.
And folks, what you'll find with the 7 keys, and it really, as I'm looking at the survey, I started to think about it. One of the things I like about the 7 keys, and I don't have the history with it that Chris does. I mean, this is really, Chris's baby. He's grown up from an infant to now a mature adult, so to speak. And they're very reachable. That is, they're tangible. One of the nice things about the 7 keys, as you can see, I mean, let's just take the first one: right people in the right seats. This is something that's very easy for all of us to understand. And we'll talk more about that, because there's a reason that right people in the right seats is number 1, because what we'll talk about is that if you don't have the right people, and if you don't have them in the right seats, nothing else works. I mean, that can be, we have a company that we're working with right now that has a leadership deficit of some kind, and we find that every week working with them, we're really challenged, and we keep coming back to that. That's a problem that we're going to have to try to solve with them.
That's true.
So
that is very true. Let me share. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah, share.
Well, share the poll. Right, share the results. Right now,
Oh.
This was one where you had more than one answer you could provide. So we get some weird results. 50%. New customers. The big one was reducing costs. So that's the profitability piece. But after that, reducing costs was the highest. Competition sounds great because it's the lowest, but then you're spread across the others. Okay, so we need a plan, finding people, attaining new customers. So I guess I'll interpret, Paul. They're challenged with a lot of the 7 keys that we'll get into.
Yeah, excellent.
Right. All right. So let's talk about now these 7 keys. You seeing the 7 keys there, Paul? Now I think yes. Okay.
Oh, yeah,
let's talk about the 7. Go ahead, Paul.
Well, so I have 3 up on my screen. Did you want to put all 7 up, Chris? How did you want to do this?
We'll do the 3 and then 3 and then 1. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So as I started to say, for us, number 1 is right people in the right seats. And one of the ways to think about this is really about leadership. It's, if you have someone running the organization, we're talking here about having high performance leadership teams. The high performance leadership team stems from the person who is in the number 1 seat in the organization. And really the results are clear. The key difference between a highly successful leaders and just okay leaders is that every successful leader is conscious and deliberate. And the successful leaders that we've worked with are willing to bring in people that are actually smarter or better than them in some areas. They build strong teams around them. Effective growth planning is just as it says. If we look at a lot of successful organizations that we've come across, there's a very clear plan and a set of measures to determine if they're moving in the right direction. And also some mitigation strategies for when they start to go off course, because all plans get changed. And they get changed because we live in an environment, all businesses live in an environment that's under constant change. And the companies that are successful in effective growth planning have processes in place. They measure and manage their progress, and then look for things that have to be done differently than what they originally planned. Advanced customer management it's very clear to us that it's important to identify who you want your customers to be. What markets are they in? What geographic areas are they in? What are the size of the organizations that you want to work with? As an example, we get the opportunity to meet with lots of different companies, and in many situations we find that the company that may be interested in us or we're interested in them is a little bit too large for us. So we have a dedicated area that we think we're really good at, and every company has what we think its sweet spot, so to speak. Next, number 4, Chris.
So let's talk about the robust processes. And what we learned here is that when you talk about profitable growth, what drives profitability is the processes in the business. And those that understand that spend time defining and improving their processes, specifically their core processes. They start looking at what do they need to do well at and excel at it, and what don't they need to even do, okay? Some of the maybe support functions, and they'll outsource that. So the successful ones understand the need to focus on process, because when you grow a business, what are you doing? You're selling more products and to more customers, and it's the same thing, therefore you need a process to be successful on that. They also look at differentiating their products and services. So it's not totally innovation, but the successful ones have been able to differentiate why would you buy their product over someone else's product or services. They've also done a better job at rationalizing what they have introduced over time. We're all great at introducing, well, I mean, all great. Many companies are good at introducing new products. They're not good at getting rid of those that aren't making money or old. And so these successful ones have a high % of their revenues from new products and services. The other thing they do is what they have strong core values. This, again, going way back to the Jim Collins, Good to the Great book. He pointed to the fact that, companies have very strong belief systems about how to run the company. I was listening to a podcast recently, and he talked about when he did the research, he did not want the answer to come back as being leadership, because leaders change. And he was again talking about these multinational companies that will have a new president, CEO over time, very different than privately held companies. And what came back there was that if you have a company with strong core values, strong belief system, the mission, the vision, the values, and employee engagement, that will carry them through potentially weak CEOs or leaders. But
so
they
this
have
is more than excuse me. This is more than just having the mission, vision, and values printed on posters throughout the organization. Well, this is really about what happens. This is about people's behavior. That's how you can tell about what the mission and values of an organization are. It's from what people do.
Wait, you're saying just because we print it on the wall doesn't mean people live it? That doesn't make sense. Come on.
I know it doesn't.
But you're true. That's exactly what the case is, right? Number 7, and why it's 7 is ability to execute. So successful, growing companies can get things done better, faster than the others. They've aligned their organization. They've aligned the resources. You go back to strategic planning. They have less goals based on the resources they have, and they get those goals done better. They link the goals to individual or functional performance incentives and reward systems. And there's a huge connection with accountability, which goes back to the strong core values. So you can see a lot of these are interconnected, and they are actually. And so, you know, the recap here is that there are 7 fundamentals that drive profitable growth. Those companies that do more of them are growing faster and they're more successful. A little later, we'll actually share with you a self-assessment we have where you can assess your business and see how well it's applying these 7 keys to growth. So let's talk about, and so what happens is as we present this, we have these discussions on the 7 keys. Usually the question is, well, where do you begin? I mean, okay, great, there's 7. You got to do all of them, but where do you start? And Paul kind of hinted at this earlier. The reason why Right People, Right Seats is number 1 is that is the place to start. Okay, and the key here is that if you do not have, I'll say, the right leader, so the president, CEO, and or the leadership team, these companies are less successful. And we've seen this combination of the assessments that we do and the clients that we work with. When we have a CEO or president that understands his strengths and weaknesses or her strengths and weaknesses, and they've then built a team below them to support what they're doing, they're more successful. When they don't do that, then there's a hole. In fact, you know, I was talking to one of our partners, Gary, the other day, and we were talking about, you know, what we do. And I said, well, Gary, what is it that we do to help these clients? And he said, Chris, you know, you've got an owner that may not be doing what he or she needs to do, and they're kind of stuck. And so we either have to move them out, which we can't do because they're the owner, or we augment them. And quite often we see once there's been this augmentation put in, then the success of the business thrives. There's one example I'll share with you, one of our clients. It was interesting. So there was, company was a small woodworking shop, 70, 80 people, decent size. And there was 4 owners, each equal owner of the business. And they'd asked us to do the strategic planning. We built the plan, and they asked us to help implement the plan. And as we were doing the reviews, some of the projects in the operational area, which one of the owners was responsible for, was not getting it done. He basically wasn't executing the plan. And, you know, I raised concern a few times saying, well, you know, what's happening? Why aren't we getting this done? And the other owners were like, well, you know, that's him. That's what he does. And it got to a point where I said,
that's what he does.
That's what he doesn't do, right? And it got to a point where I said, you know, I had to have a sit down with the president, one of the owners. I said, look, you know, this person is inhibiting your growth. He is prohibiting you from achieving your goals. And, you know, the president's reaction was, well, what are you going to do, fire him? And, you know, Chris, being who Chris is, goes, yeah, I'm going to fire him. And, you know, he's kind of laughing. I said, well, I'm not going to fire him, but we have to find a way to either make him successful, would be plan A, or get him out, which is plan B. And unfortunately, plan A wasn't going to work because he was in this old, I don't want to work any harder, any smarter. So we actually bought him out. Well, the client ended up buying him out. Actually set him up in a nice little office in their current facility. It was an amicable exchange. They had an office later on, was doing some consulting to them. But with him gone, we then brought in another person to drive operations, not an owner, but just someone to head of operations. And profit margins doubled in 9 months, because this person the new person had the leadership skills and capabilities to make it happen and was a team player. So the key here is to look at yourself if you're the president CEO, if not, and then look at your team. And we'll share with you some ways to do with that. In fact,
and Jack Welch had a good saying here. Before you're a leader, success is all about growing yourself. When you become a leader, success is all about growing others. And that's kind of the moral of the story here.
And we wanted to put this up here because as you start getting into these two pieces of right people, right seats, one piece of it is the president and CEO, right? Mm-hmm. And that's actually a huge piece. In fact, we show that here. If that person has the right mindset, that company can flourish. But if they don't, they're not necessarily hiring people below them to support or expand their goals or be better than they are, because there's a lot of issues that we'll deal with later. And so oftentimes we'll start with, what is that president and what is he and she doing? But back to the Jack Welch quote, success is all about growing others. Many people haven't had much formal training in how to be a good leader, which is a whole other quote unquote can of worms. What does it take to be a good leader? How do you become a good leader? There's a lot of tools and techniques out there to evaluate and assess you and coach you, if you will, but many people aren't necessarily stepping in to do this. So, the first thing when it comes to right people, right seats is looking at that president CEO. Does he or she have the capabilities to grow this business? And again, let's also be clear, right? Your business changes over time. What used to be a small $3, $4, $5, maybe $1 million business is now 10, it's now 30, it's now 50, it's now 100. And the skills need to change with that. Many of us have difficulty stepping up to grow a much larger business. And if that's the case, that's where that right people, right seats comes into play. How do you change that? One tool that we've seen that we like a lot, you'll heard us talk about the Jim Collins piece of this, and this reflects both to you, the president CEO, if not your team. Jim Collins has this level 5 leadership framework, which we like a lot, because he really talks about how do you go from being that individual contributor to that level 5 executive. And how he describes it is this: as you start at level 1, you're great, you're productive on your own through your talents, your skills, and your good work habits. Okay, you're the individual contributor.
Yeah, you're very effective in the workplace at this level 1. This
exactly.
is a very effective worker.
As you go to 2, you now start helping others, right? And you contribute to, say, group objectives and group goals. But as you start getting into the management level, and this is where we're maybe talking to those listening here as a manager or leader, you're starting organizing people and resources, right, towards an end goal, predetermined goals. Ideally, you as the leader are setting those goals, okay? Then as you step up to level 4, if I press the right button,
yeah.
You're now a catalyst, okay? It's not just organizing people, but catalyzing commitment to and this pursuit of a clear vision, stimulating higher performance. This is where I think, Paul, what we're seeing is we're getting some competent managers who now be running or leading a business, and they may become effective leaders, but maybe not, because of a lot of things that we're going to talk about a little later.
Mm-hmm.
But what we like about the Jim Collins model is he talks about this level 5 leader, which talks about the humility is really the impact here. Builds greatness through he calls it a paradoxical blend of humility and professional will. I was listening to a podcast a little while ago with Jim Collins, and someone was asking, well, how do you differentiate an effectively a level 4 with a level 5 executive leader? And he talked about the humility piece of it. And then someone said, well, that's great. Well, how do you measure humility, if you will? And he said, it's interesting because it's more art than science. But he did talk about when they do interviews with these level 5 leaders, they're using the we word a lot more than they're using the I word.
There's a lot of sharing. Level five leaders, from my experience, do a lot of sharing, Chris, about how the organization became successful. Like I said, they rarely talk about I. It's more about we. There's a tremendous focus that I found on them identifying other people or many people in the organization that have helped it move forward and be successful.
And you go back to the quote, right, that we had from Jack Welch about growing others. That's why we kind of like that. When you get into level 4, I mean, level 3, competent manager, you should be leading others. But at level 5, that's all that it's about, right, is building your team to be successful. And so, if you're a president, CEO leading an organization today, where are you on this scale? What do you need to do to step up from a 3 to a 4 level or from a 4 to a 5 level? Listening to Jim Collins, there's not a lot of level 5s out there. It's very, very rare. But that's what made those companies, extraordinarily successful, is that great leader. Also, what are you doing to build that team below you? If you are into that level 4, which again, by the way, not four is not necessarily easy to get to either. What are you then doing now to build your team? So we're talking here about the right people, right seats being that real key to being successful.
That's the foundation, really.
It really is. It really is, right? Because Paul, you and I know we've gone to work for organizations, and you kind of hinted at it, a little while ago. We're working with one right now where that president CEO. I'm not sure. Let's see. Is there level 0? No, it's probably not that bad. But
stop that.
But that person's definitely not what this organization needs to be successful. And the leadership team is struggling with it, and I know that the leader himself is struggling with it. Right. So let's move on. Let's say this is a framework for the leader. The next question is your leadership team. How do you know if you have a good leadership team? One of the exercises that we've developed is what we call the parking lot exercise. And it kind of goes like this. In fact, before we do this, if you look at people and organizations, if you're trying to find success, we kind of work backwards. If you look at this sheet here, if someone's successful, they delivered results. Let's talk about, that. They've delivered results, whatever the results and the goals of the business. Now, the next question is, well, how have they delivered those results? Have they done it with the behaviors and culture that you as an organization support? The old style of I'm the dictator and you're going to do it my way and, you have to adapt to me is gone, right? It's now the leader has to adapt to their people. But is that person sharing the behaviors and cultures that you have in the organization to be successful? And then on top of that is the competencies. Does that person literally have the skills and competencies to get the job done? If you look at this in a very simplistic way, you need people that have the results, the behaviors and cultures, and the competencies. So we have this exercise where you look at your organization and your leadership team in particular, and the first thing you do is you visually, not physically, take everybody in your organization and stick them in the parking lot. Okay, it's a visual metaphor, right? Not a
right.
Real exercise.
They don't have to go out there into the parking lot.
They don't have to go in the parking lot. Then you design your organization. They talk about the organizational chart, but design the organization. What are the results you need in some functional areas? What are the behaviors you want in functional areas? What are the competencies you want in some functional areas? And so you're kind of redesigning the organization. If I'm going to, and you design looking, let's say 3 years out, what does this organization need to look like 3 years from today? And yeah, it might be an org chart. And on that org chart, you might have operations, which is ops here, $, which is finance, right? Sales, HR, production, you may have others, engineering. I just got a couple up here. And then what you do is you look at the operational, let's say ops here, that those couple bullets that say, what do you need for the results, behaviors, and competencies? Then you look out in the parking lot and you go, do I have a person that fits that? You don't go and say, oh, does Mary, who's head of operations, fit it, which you do by default. But it's someone out there that has the results, behaviors, and competencies that you want. And if they have the competencies, yes, They have the behaviors? Yes. They have the results? Yes. Good. I'm excited. Then I go over to the finance and do the same thing. And what you'll see here is that in this example, that person that is now obviously running finance has the competencies, but they don't have the behaviors and they're not delivering the results. So the bottom question is, this person a keeper or not? And this is a great exercise. And usually what happens at the end of the exercise is you have this org chart, if you will, and there's empty boxes on the org chart and there's people in the parking lot. And that's showing you a gap between what you need and what you have. I did this with a client a few years ago, kind of an ad hoc, let's go to the whiteboard and do this. And at the end of the session, she was almost crying when it kind of hit her. She had it in a gut feeling, but it hit her that half her team wasn't the right people. And that's why they were struggling.
And typically, especially with small businesses, when a person gets a business started, they typically have the right people in the right seats, and sometimes it's because they've only been able to find those people, or they're related, or somehow they've been working with them. But just as Chris is saying, as your organization grows, those needs change. So this is a very low-cost, easy way for you to start the decision-making process about the people that you have and what you need to do, just as Chris was saying about the client that he worked with. We
also have a little cheat sheet on this that we'll share with you later on how to do this on your own. So recap, right? We've talked about the facts of growth. The key piece being it's relative, it's internally controllable, and those that are applying more of the 7 are more successful. We explained the 7 keys, and that you need to begin at the right people, right seats. Well, then the question, that we've been kind of dealing with and getting asked is, well, wait, why is this such a hard thing? Why is there a struggle? Those 7 aren't that, rocket science, right, Paul? Even if you did work for NASA, they're pretty straightforward. So what's the trouble? Why are there so many average performing or underperforming businesses? And this is our belief. This is what we've come to learn and figure out. First is many of them are stuck in this daily firefighting. And I use that, I say that's an excuse. I'm always dealing with the day-to-day stuff, the fires, and that's probably very, very, very true. But the fact is, if they're doing that on a recurring basis, they probably don't have the systems in place to manage their business. They're also, which is interesting here, I use the word risk adverse, which is kind of weird to say an entrepreneur is risk adverse, but they get to a point where they look at the profits and the losses and, geez, do I want to risk hiring a person? Do I want to risk going down a new path? Do I want to risk opening an office? And they get stagnant and they don't do anything, and the risk overcomes some of their goals.
And sometimes this assessment of risk is much more of a gut kind of a feeling versus some going through some formula, going through some structured process to look at what might happen, what they're thinking of doing, and what some of the possibilities might be, and how to mitigate some of the problems, some of the downturn perhaps, and how to use some of the strengths of the organization to move it forward.
Well, you and I have talked about this, where I think we've seen or even heard that owners have a internal discussion in their head. I'd like to grow sales. An example would be, right, I want to grow sales. I got to hire somebody, but how do I know if that person, I got to spend X, how do I know that person's going to be successful? And so maybe I shouldn't hire him. Maybe I don't know how to hire him. Geez, if he's not successful, is that not good? So maybe I shouldn't hire him. I mean, that's just one example where they do the circular discussion of talking themselves into, doing that, right?
Right. Right. And so always what we suggest, by the way, one of the key components to a process like this, and we won't go into in detail here, but I have a saying, I say, begin with the end in mind. So what is it you're trying to accomplish? So we can start to look at what the results are that you're looking for. And when it comes to personnel, what are the skills, competencies, commitments? And we have a process that we take people through looking at the results that they are interested in getting.
Bingo. The other thing that we've seen we put in this category called ego. They know they're stuck, but they don't want to ask for help, and they believe that they, as a leader, and it could be the president, CEO, or some functional head, believes that they needed to know how to do everything. We had a conversation with one of our CEOs again a while ago, and I was talking to her and asking her, she seemed very stressed out. I said, geez, you have a lot going on. You seem a lot stressed out. What's bothering you? Why are you so stressed out? And she went through all the things that she's working on. I said, well, wait, why are you trying to do so many of these things? Like, you have other people on your team that could help you with this. Why don't you, delegate and let those others do it? And she looked at me and she said, and she pointed her fingers to her back. She said, Chris, can't you see that cape on my back? I'm Superwoman. I have to be able to do all this stuff because I'm the president and CEO. And I said, oh my God, no, that's not the case. Your job as CEO is not to do everything. Your job is to figure out what to do and get it done through your team. But she didn't want others to know that she didn't know how to do it. And I think we have a lot of people out there that struggle with this because I can't let others know I don't know how to do this, because they think as a president, CEO, or even a head of a function that they need to have the answers, which isn't true. Right. The real fact is they need to figure out how to get it done. And no one is necessarily an expert in all areas. We ask for help if we want to get our golf game better, or if we want to reduce weight, we go to experts, but we don't want to do that on the business side. I don't get it. And what happens when you put all this together, and I think I've coined this term called comfortably stuck. So owners, leaders, or teams are in this situation where they're not performing as well as they want to, so they're underperforming, but they're doing well enough where there's not enough pain to really risk it, if you will, or make a shift. Therefore, they become what I call comfortably stuck.
And that person in that video, in that visual, doesn't look very comfortable, but they certainly do look stuck. They look more drunk than comfortable.
So this is, as we start thinking about why are they struggling, yeah, you get the daily fighting, but that's actually an excuse. They don't want to risk maybe what's going on. They don't want to let go of ego, and they become in this comfortably stuck pattern. Here's a little exercise. Again, a little exercise we've done to maybe help you or share it with someone that might be in this situation. So, the question is, has performance improved? And we're not talking about revenues going up just because the market did it, but performance, your sales per employee, your sales per unit, your margins, your profitability. That's the performance, your quality. You've done something specific to increase performance. And if it has, hey, keep doing it. Good job. If it hasn't, the question is, are you okay with that performance? Okay, so performance hasn't improved. Are you okay with that performance? If you are, you're comfortably stuck. You could be a higher performing, but more likely you're comfortably stuck. But most people don't go down that path. Most people go down I'm not happy with my performance. Then the question is, have you created some goals? Again, the assumption is that businesses are not going to get better unless they set some goals. We call these SMART goals, right? The specific, measurable, relevant, and time-bound goals. So if you've set some goals, great. Did you coach your team to help them achieve that goal? Back to the quote we had earlier, you now have to help them be more successful. And if you did, great. But is the team not performing? Are you not getting the results? So if maybe you're not doing a good job coaching the team, and if that's the case, that again comes back to leadership, because if you haven't coached the team, it's a leadership issue. You haven't done your job. In fact, after it gets back to leadership, it circles back to the fact that, hey, you probably didn't put any goals out there. Back to the SMART goal piece. If you didn't set SMART goals, then that's a leadership issue. And this all really goes back to the fact that, are you really happy with your performance? I would argue that if you go through this short exercise, it's not obviously very detailed, you're actually comfortably stuck. So a little exercise you could try yourself or share with others.
All right.
All right, Paul. So let's summarize. We're doing well on time.
Okay.
the research has shown that there are 7 keys to growing a business. The facts also show that those keys are something you can control as a leader, and they're more internal controllable factors than external factors. But it's not about all 7 keys. I mean, those are important, but the leadership piece, specifically the right people, right seats, is what we found to be that key, that critical junction, fork, whatever you want to call it, to be successful. And that's why we focused a lot on the people side of this, the right people, right seats, because, you know, basically the combination of the research we've done and then trying to apply that, where we get stuck, I think, Paul, the most is on the leadership side. Right.
And what's important to remember from this is, if you go back to the work that Jim Collins did, which is spectacular work, what he talks about in terms of a level 5 is a person who will look in the mirror periodically, because we have a saying, we say, if it's up to be, if it is to be, it's up to me. And that's just a statement about, if this organization is to move forward, what are the kinds of things I can do with my people to help this organization move forward? If it is to be, it's up to me. Taking responsibility.
Oh, hit the wrong poll. One more poll. I'd like to know, what's the primary change in your business that's needed to improve performance? So we've gone through, you know, the leader's mindset, or my mindset. Maybe I need to change a person or two on the team. So if you would go through and click on one of these, choose which one is needed to kind of change your plan or continue your plan. You know, establishing a growth plan might be the option. You've got the people in place, and therefore it's really into a plan. Or we've got the people, we have a plan, but we need some outside help. Or, you know, our performance is solid. We're doing fine as it is. Therefore, we don't need to change anything.
So this is, we want you to select one. This is a forced choice, just like the test you did in the 8th grade.
Oh, 8th grade. That goes back a few.
That's a ways away.
So we're getting a good voting here. So just write these down. Now, interestingly enough, that's interesting. Okay, I'm going to close this and share the results. And Paul, what's your reaction to that? So.
Oh. Well, you know, it's interesting. I love establishing a growth plan. That's really neat, because, I mean, we did that purposely, not just establish a plan, but establish a growth plan. And so that takes into a number of factors. It's looking at the current situation that you have, and as I said before, beginning with the end in mind. Where would you like to be? And then you can identify what are the challenges we have from getting from where we are to where we want to be. You want to grow, and you want to grow by a plan, and that's terrific. That's excellent to see. And then changing the leaner's mindset. Well, you know, we're gonna have you be a fly on the wall with us when we go back to our client who is essentially the leader is comfortably stuck.
I find it. I like the plan. We are seeing the people side, right? We've got a lot on the mindset, and some on the person or two on the team. No one thinks their performance is solid, and no one thinks they need help too. All right. So it'll be interesting to see how you shared how they scored themselves versus others. So let's do this. The question, so the options you have are this, and then we'll get into some questions. So if there's more questions, there's a few of them out there. But if you want to ask some more questions, please do so, and we'll try to get to them. We have a good amount of time left. So what do? You need to change, a third of you need to change the leadership or mindset. Some of you need to do a growth plan. You continue what you're doing on the path that you're on. We don't advocate that, because that's the same old thing. Unless you're doing well. You could reevaluate your situation and go, we've got to make a change. We consciously need to come together and make a change and refocus or set some focus and put some controllable help in there and get better. And there's many companies that can do that. The third option, obviously, is ask for help. Some people can do a great job losing weight on their own, improving their golf game on their own. Many times they have to go for a coach. The real point is, do you want to get better and to what extent, and do you want to invest in that? So the thing that we would ask you to do is think about, how to get better and what do you need to do to make that happen. One thing we talked about assessment earlier on, Paul.
Yeah.
Here's the
I like this.
It's a little tight to read, so don't worry about trying to read it because we'll send this to you. But on that first column, you'll see the 7 keys, these 7 growth practices, and then across the right side are levels of performance. This isn't a doing it or not doing it, it's a level of performance. So I said a level 1 at the top strategic plan, you don't have any. And on the far right, you've got the goals, the objectives, the strategies. It's linked to a dashboard, linked to incentives. You're high performing. What I've found helpful with this is not just to complete it yourself, but pass it to your team and have your team score it and then compare the results. Because it's not necessarily what you think, is your team on the same page? Do you all agree you've got a good plan, or do you all agree your processes are a level 2 and need to get better? We'll do this with clients. We actually have a service where we actually go in and do a detailed assessment with companies. And it's interesting because we do a little survey on ourselves in advance, and we usually ask, again, along these 7 fundamentals, how well you're performing. And one of the questions is, do you have a robust strategic plan? And often we get, a high score of at least, 3s, if not 4s and 5s. And then we ask the people in the leadership team, so tell me, what are the goals for the business? And yes, we don't get all the same answers. So they have strategies, but they're really not defined or aligned. So I encourage you to take this, do it yourself when I send it to you, and then share it with your team and see how well as a team you're on the same page in terms of how you're performing.
And a very rich discussion can come from this after you and the members of your team completed when you share the results. And it's not just noticing that you scored a 2 and somebody else scored a 4 or a 5, but a conversation about how did that happen? What are they seeing differently than what you're seeing? What is everyone on the team, what are they using to provide their own opinion and evaluation? That's where the richness comes in of a conversation to start to think through, here are the things that are happening, and let's identify what we need to start doing differently and what some of our strengths are that we want to support and encourage. So you can have a terrific discussion from completing this.
Very much so. We've had clients do this, and they have some robust discussions, and they call us and they go, what do you do? I said, well, go fix this. A couple questions we got here, Paul. How do you motivate a leader who isn't motivated? I think that changed back to the leader's mindset question. Let's see. The short answer is you don't. I'd love to say that you can, but more often than not, you can't. But when we've been successful, it's a matter of understanding, back to the slide earlier with the risks and concerns and firefighting and ego, starting to peel that back to understand why. One of the tools we've used in the past, oftentimes an owner or leader doesn't necessarily know or believe that things are as bad as he or she is being told that they are. There's a tool out there called a 360-degree performance review, where, let's say, this leader gets feedback from his direct reports in 7-8 different areas, specifically dealing with leadership. Then they actually get some quantifiable results that say, hey, and oh, by the way, they fill it out. So if they say, I'm giving myself a 5, a great leader, and they get 2s from everybody else, then it starts creating the wedge where the owner starts saying, maybe I'm not as good as I think. And then the question is, what's the motivation? What's the goal? Is there some greed out there? Is there some fear that can help this person get unstuck, if you will?
So what you're saying, Chris, and that's important, is to get at the kind of the root of why this person is coming across. Well, first off, do they know that they're coming across as not being motivated? And second of all, what's at the root of that? What is it that they're avoiding? What is it that they might be afraid of? What is it that is really creating a barrier between them and their success?
Exactly. This gets
What are the
into
other
your
questions, Jeff?
this gets into your psychology, background, right? I mean, you and I've had these discussions offline about trying to, I think I use the word get behind the brain, but you've talked about that behavioral component, whether it be a disc analysis, Myers-Briggs, or something to get into what's going on with that person. We're dealing with that again with a client right now, and trying to overcome that. And it's unfortunately sad that many of these people that are not motivated, there's a reason for it, and it's hard for them to get unstuck.
Right.
So. Other question. Is
and by the way,
growth...
before we get off of this, one thing to remember for everyone is that awareness produces change. So having this conversation with a leader who's not motivated, and being able to go past some of what just the surface comments are, and get at some of what's at the base and what are some of the specific barriers. Sometimes that conversation produces an awareness with that person, and that some changes start to happen as a result. But going back to what you said before, Chris, sometimes the change is not going to happen. Let's go on to the next question.
Someone asks, is developing a growth plan priority number 2? As you get beyond the right people, right seats, I would definitely advocate a growth plan. If you have the team together, then if you have the team built, then the next thing is to get that team aligned on what the goals are. So the growth plan is definitely a number 2. And by the way, that'll then start identifying what customer segments you want to go after, what processes need to be improved, what products do you need to introduce or cannibalize. Are we living our strong core values? So that growth plan, that strategic growth plan, is number 2. One of the somewhat related questions I've had with other companies is that they say, well, I don't have my team together completely. Should I put the plan together without the team? That's a mixed answer. If the focus going forward is sales, and sales or revenue growth is a key piece of making the business successful, and that person's what's missing, I might wait a little before you put that plan together, because he or she on the sales side is going to have some huge influence on that. If it's not that key need for the business, just saying if it's finance or HR or other, that's not necessarily the focus of the growth plan, then definitely start building that plan together, because then as you build that plan together, that might identify that type of person or different type of person that you want to bring in that function. So that's so yeah, strategic planning is definitely number 2. I think some stats show that companies with strategic plans are 14%, just alone, 14% more profitable than those without live strategic plans.
And the key to a strategic plan is not only determining where you want to be, but how you're going to get there. What are the actions that are required for each piece of the strategic plan? And as Chris was saying before, that's an excellent place for you to have your team involved, have them in that conversation, because you will be, as a leader of the organization, you will be delegating a lot of the responsibilities for completing the strategic plan to other people in the organization. You don't have to do it all yourself.
Exactly. Well, that's, we're going to end it. We got a minute left. Got more questions. I'll send out some responses to those personally. But if you have, so again, profitable growth is driven by these 7 keys, 7 fundamentals, but the right people, the right seats is one of the keys, and that needs to happen first. We will send you, this, again, webinar has been recorded. We will send you a copy of the presentation. We'll also send you a separate page so you can do your own self-assessment on the 7 keys. If you want to hear more about how we could help you and have questions on this, please give us a ring. at the same time, we'll follow up with you maybe in a week or so and see if you've actually completed the 7 keys and see how you've scored.
Yeah, we found that a lot of people complete the 7 key self-assessment and then come up with a lot of questions, and we can have a really terrific discussion about the results that you have gotten for yourself with the self-assessment. So we'll give you a call in about a week or so.
Thank you all for attending. That is the end. Hopefully we'll see you again, or hear you listen to us again on future podcasts or like on a webinar. So have a great day and a great week.
Thank you, folks. Bye.